Aloha. This is Professor Bove coming to you via remote for today's lecture, which is on bureaucracy, the federal bureaucracy. If I was to ask you, which I did a couple weeks ago, what is the most powerful arm of the government? Is it Congress, which makes the laws, the presidency, which executes them, or the courts, which interpret them and enforce them? If I remember, Kai said it was the courts, and I kind of said it was the executive branch. And neither one of us are wrong because it's just an opinion. But what if I were to tell you there is a strong argument to be made that it's none of those three, that it's actually the federal bureaucracy that is the most powerful? So if that's the case, or if we're going to make a case that that's the case, we need to examine what oftentimes is called the fourth branch of government, or what some derisively call the deep state. So let's dig in to the federal bureaucracy. As we're making a case on the bureaucracy, it has direct control over people's daily lives. Think about it for a minute. Your mail, if you get a ticket, that's part of the bureaucracy. All federal, state, local employees of the government are part of the bureaucracy. When you go through TSA on a flight, that's bureaucracy. I set off the alarms every time I go through because I have knee replacements. I have metal in both knees, and I'm always wanded. And sometimes I have the dust put on my hands, fingerprinting, the whole 9 yards. The older I get, the easier it gets to get through because they just figure that old guy is harmless. So, and I actually, that is one of the advantages of aging. But bureaucracy touches every aspect of our daily lives. FDA approves the food and medicine. IRS collects your taxes. TSA, as I said, screens you at the airport. So if power means direct control over people's daily lives, the bureaucracy holds more than any other of the three branches. So what is this thing called the federal bureaucracy? Well, basically, in a nutshell, it's the unelected administrative body of the executive branch. The executive branch, presidency. So then you can make a case, well, if it's part of the presidency, then the executive branch must be the most powerful because you combine the president and all his power with the bureaucracy. So we need to examine that a little bit too to see if that's actually the case or if the bureaucracy is a little bit more independent. After all, it's a vast network of departments and agencies and commissions that carry out the day-to-day work of the government. They are the workers that keep the machine running. Federal government employs close to 10 million people, and they have various ways that they employ them. Some are contract employees, some are just regular civil service, all kinds of different ways. But it adds up to about 10 million people, a little short of that, about 9.6, 9.8. State and local governments add another 19 million government employees to the payroll. And that, so it's close to 30 million people, about 28, 29 million people. Government accounts for around 15% of the American workforce. So pretty big segment. Not all of them are basset hounds, by the way. That's just a cool bureaucratic picture I came up with. Characteristics of the bureaucracy. First, it's hierarchical in structure, meaning there's a chain of command. It's not a flatline type of system. There's top, there's middle, there's bottom. There's a division of labor. Everybody has their role in the bureaucracy, and that's done for efficiency. There are policy experts, people who have worked on the same issue literally their entire adult lives for 30, 40 years until they retire. This means the bureaucracy is full of experts in their specific field. My son is a water expert. He works for the Water Quality Control Board, and he can tell you more about water quality control than I can. I've heard him on the phone a few times on business calls. I don't understand a word he's saying. I really don't. It's that technical expertise, but he is an expert in that field. More characteristics of the bureaucracy. They are rule-based operation, meaning everyone follows the same set of rules, both within the bureaucracy and without. If you're coming to get a permit for a building permit, for example, you have to do A, you have to do B, you have to do C. It's all written down and it's told to you. If you don't do those things, you don't get the permit. It's merit-based employment. So ideally, qualifications, not favoritism, is how you get hired in the bureaucracy and how you get promoted in the bureaucracy. That is the ideal. Most of the time, I would say that's the case, but sometimes favoritism creeps in. Impersonality. Well, what does that mean? Decisions are not personal. They're not going to deny you your building permit because they don't like you. They're going to deny it because you haven't met A, B, and C rules. Um, they might like to deny you, but they will probably begrudging you if you follow all the rules. So it's not personal. Decisions are not personal. Federal bureaucracy is divided up into departments, agencies, and commissions. Departments are the big ones. They're the ones that employ 80% of the workforce in the federal bureaucracy. State Department, Department of Defense, Education, Homeland Security, Veterans Affairs. They are all headed up by secretaries that are appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate. And again, they employ about 80%. They carry out the large areas of federal policy, foreign policy, military, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, the big agent or the big departments. Agencies come next, and they're only 15% of the federal bureaucracy. There are things like NASA, the Environmental Protection Agency, the FBI. Some of them are in departments, some of them are off on their own. Finally, commissions make up only 5% of the federal bureaucracy, and they are designed to be regulate parts of the economy with a degree of independence from Congress and the president. So those would be things like the Federal Reserve that Trump has clashed with recently, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the FCC, things of that nature that are relatively independent. It can be argued that just like Congress, federal bureaucracy writes the laws, it implements the laws, and it enforces the laws. And we'll look into each one of those. Bureaucratic rulemaking. Congress sets the goals. Congress writes laws in broad strokes, and the bureaucracy figures out what those broad strokes mean and how to fill in the blanks and the details. So when a law is passed, the relevant agency studies the new law and then proposes rules to guide the law and the implementation of the law. Once approved, those rules have the force of law. So Congress might pass a law that vaguely says protect the environment. It'd be a little more specific than that, but that's just kind of uh, an example, or ensure that our food is safe. The bureaucracy then translates that broad stroke into what can be thousands of pages, hundreds of pages, thousands of pages of regulations that both business, industry, labor, and consumers um, have to live by, have to obey. So in a real sense, the bureaucrats are writing the specifics of the law. Congress, big strokes, bureaucracy, the details. Implementation, bureaucratic implementation. Once the rules are written, the bureaucracy shifts to carrying them out. They design programs, they hire staff, they issue guidance. One example would be Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. Congress passed it, the president signed it, but it was the bureaucracy that set up the healthcare exchanges. It was the bureaucracy that wrote the coverage standards. And it was the bureaucracy that literally enrolled millions of people in the Affordable Care Act. It wasn't President Obama sitting there at a laptop, signing you up when you logged into the web page. At least I don't think it was. Finally, bureaucratic enforcement. much like what the courts do. Agencies don't just write the rules, they police them. They conduct inspections, they issue penalties, fines, or sanctions, just like the courts. Bureaucracy interprets and enforces the law. An example would be the Securities and Exchange Commission when they find financial misconduct or insider trading, they prosecute those guys and they can issue fines and penalties and do. One could argue they should issue more, but that is their job. So, bottom line, laws are skeletons. The bureaucracy provides the muscle and the nerves that make them move. Congress and the president actually often defer to the bureaucracy because they have technical expertise. Remember, they're full of policy experts. And that specialized knowledge allows bureaucrats to oftentimes set the agenda and influence what policies are even possible. That makes the bureaucracy very powerful. If you're in Congress or you're the president or you're a staff member of one of those and you go to the specialist in the bureaucracy like the EPA and say, hey, we want to do this on air pollution, and they're not on the same wavelength of you, they will give you alternatives or three or four sets of alternatives that fit more in line with what they think is possible. And because you're not an expert, you usually pick one of those three and run with it. That makes them very, very, very powerful individuals. The history of the bureaucracy, really quickly, bureaucratie, I believe, if my French is good, which means government writing desk. It was coined by mid-18th century by the French philosopher Vincent de Gournay. All these phrases that come from the French are kind of interesting. Derived from the French word bureau, meaning writing desk, like Riley's writing on right there, and cratie, meaning government. So government writing desk, bureaucracy. And I believe that is a replica or an exact replica of Thomas Jefferson's desk that he wrote the Declaration of Independence on. Leads me to believe Riley may have helped him. Got no proof of that, but that picture tells a pretty interesting story. George Washington, first head of the bureaucracy. The word bureaucracy does not appear in the Constitution, but Article 2, Section 2 gives the president the power to nominate officers of the United States, and Section 2, or Article 2, Section 3 gives the president broad executive powers to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. Well, how do you do this without staff? The staff becomes the bureaucracy. First Republic, the bureaucracy was really tiny. Washington had 4 cabinet members and a few hundred bureaucrats, a few hundred workers that worked for the president and the cabinet. By 1800, which was only 8 years later, bureaucracy was 3,000 workers. So it had expanded pretty quickly. Today, the cabinet has 15 members, and as we said, 10 million staff people work in the bureaucracy at the federal level. The spoils system, which is interesting, it's how the bureaucracy used to work, and it goes back to colonial times. Back in the day in colonial times, pre-revolution times, when you won an office, if it came with any staff or perks or benefits, you gave those to your friends and your family. That's just the way it was done. But as the government grew, this got out of control. Andrew Jackson perfected the process of the spoils system. He replaced hundreds and hundreds of workers when he won the presidency. 10% of the federal workforce turned over under Andrew Jackson. In 1 year alone, 400 postmasters, which was one of the great spoils jobs, were replaced with Jackson allies. The problem is when you do that much replacing, incompetence comes into the system, and also corruption can be a real problem. The spoils system came to kind of a dramatic end in 1881 with the assassination of James Garfield, who was assassinated by an unhappy job seeker that Garfield had won. This guy thought he was entitled to a job, didn't get it. Thought, well, then I'll just shoot the president. And he did. And it shocked the country. And the result was the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act, so that this would not happen again. Everybody knew it was out of control. Created the Civil Service Commission, the merit system of hiring that we talked about earlier, that people are hired based on merit, not favoritism, not that your uncle's cousin's friend got you the job, and there's no firing without cause. Today, over 90% of bureaucrats are career employees hired for hired by exam and qualifications, not politics, generally. So from a few hundred in 1793 to 10 million today, for every avenue of American life, we have a matching bureaucracy. Over 600 federal departments and agencies and commissions for now. But actually, the interesting part of that is if you chat GPT or you Google, how many federal bureaucracies are there? Sometimes it tells you 400, sometimes 450, sometimes 500, sometimes 600. Sometimes it often says, well, we don't really know. And I think that's probably the best answer. We don't really know. So I just chose 600 as what I thought was a median number, probably a fairly accurate number for today. 10 years from now, 5 years from now, 6 months from now, it'll probably be different. So the list of federal departments, agencies, commissions are many. These are the big ones. We've already talked about some of them: State Department, Department of Defense, CIA, NSA, Peace Corps, Commerce, Small Business, Fed, etc. But there are others, lots of them. So I thought today we'd go through all 600, and so you could see just how big the federal government is. There's a couple: Botanic Garden, Bureau of Alcohol and Tax, Chemistry Safety Board. Well, we'll go through most of them. How about that? American Battle Monuments Commission, AmeriCorps, Bureau of Labor Statistics. That one was in the news recently when Trump tried or fired somebody over there. Copyright Office, Corps of Engineers, Council of Economic Advisors, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security. I hope that one's running well. Department of Commerce, Department of Defense, Department of Education, Federal Library and Information Center, Fleet Forces Command. I don't know what that is. Food and Agriculture, Food and Nutrition, Food and Safety, Foreign Agricultural Service, Health and Human Services, Federal Interagency Council on Statistical Policy. That's a big name. Federal Housing Finance Agency, National Indian Gaming Commission, Justice Program, Kennedy Center, Labor Department, National Ocean Service, iCollege, National Defense University iCollege. I have no idea what that is. Office of National Drug Control Policy, Office of Nuclear Energy, Office of Personnel Management, Social Security. I know that one. Trustee Program. Don't know that one. U.S. Africa Command, U.S. Agency for Global Media, U.S. Military Academy, West Point. Everybody's heard of that one. U.S. European Command, U.S. Fire Administration, U.S. Northern Command, U.S. Strategic Command, Veterans Employment and Training. So over 600 agencies and departments for now. When the bureaucracy works, like we talked about in the very first lecture, we hardly notice. We take it for granted, right? Safe food, clean air and water, daily mail, national parks, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. When it works and it's great. And we don't really notice. But when bureaucracy fails, it can be absolutely catastrophic, and oftentimes is. The LA fires is the most recent example. Hundreds of people are displaced, millions, if not billions of dollars lost in terms of housing and businesses, and the government didn't work very well. And there's all kinds of recriminations. It'll take years to figure out what went wrong, and hopefully they can correct it. But that is an example of when bureaucracy fails. Um, the EDD fraud that cost California taxpayers $32 billion. dollars. Um, Long wait times at the VA. Failure to regulate the financial markets and the housing markets led to the Great Depression, as we talked about, and also the Great Recession. And there's a big price to be paid when bureaucracy fails us. There are problems with the bureaucracy that sometimes lead to these failures. It's immense and it's permanent. Specialist versus generalist. So there's nobody looking oftentimes at the big picture. You need both. You need the specialists, but you also need generalists to have a vision that goes beyond the horizon. It's less accountable because it's not elected and it can't be fired basically without cause. And sometimes they come to serve their own interests as opposed to the interest of the people or the elected officials. There's two areas we'll talk about that are pretty big problems with bureaucracy. One is regulatory capture, the other is principal agent problem. Regulatory capture is agencies sometimes get too cozy with the industries they regulate. The example is the FFA accused of being too close to Boeing during Boeing's safety scandals. I have other examples we won't really go into very much, but the FFA was supposed to ground a bunch of Southwest flights and they didn't. They let them slide. Um, some of the oil spills have been because of lack of comprehensive oversight by the regulatory agency. So this can be a real problem and one that is hard to fix because the regulatory agency, it's a human nature thing. Most people like to get along with other people. And so it's tough to come in and be the bad guy all the time. And the people you're regulating want to be nice to you. And so there can be kind of a slow um, co-opting of a regulatory body. Principal agent problems, the other problem, Congress, as the principal, tells the agent, the bureaucracy, to do something, or the president does. But the agent may have their own agenda with their own expertise or political leanings leading to conflict. A good example would be the Environmental Protection Agency. If you go to work for the EPA, you're probably an environmentalist. You probably care about the environment, whether it's the oceans or the land or the air or whatever. So when a new administration comes in, if they don't share that concern and they start issuing executive orders or the Congress passes laws that scale back on environmental regulations, you as an employee may resist that. You may in your heart feel that's wrong. Um, and so the bureaucracy will resist. And think about this for a minute. Bureaucracy is permanent. The president comes and presidents come and go. Even Congresses come and go over time. So usually the bureaucracy can outweight you, and oftentimes does. So who oversees the bureaucracy? Who do they answer to? In theory, it's the president and the Congress. Article 2, sections 2 and 3 lay the groundwork. President appoints top bureaucratic leaders. Congress controls the funding and has oversight on the bureaucracy. And then the courts can review and strike down regulations if they don't like what the bureaucracy is doing. That is in theory. Doesn't always work that way, as we'll see, because in practice, oversight by Congress and the president is sporadic. They got a lot on their plate. Congress doesn't have the manpower or the time or the expertise. The president simply can't control over 600 departments and agencies with 10 million people. And the courts have to wait for cases to be brought to them. So they can't act even if they see something that's wrong. This gives the bureaucracy a wide zone of autonomy where they can act with very little interference. And if they so choose, uh, can go their own way in spite of uh, differences with Congress or the president. The real oversight is people. The media, whistleblowers, watchdog groups. They're the ones that time after time after time call attention to something, uh, and then change happens. Remember when we talked about Peter Buxton and him calling attention, calling out to the media, the Tuskegee syphilis study that went on for 40 years until he blew the whistle on it. He was a whistleblower. And once it got out into the media, it stopped. That's a whistleblower, and that's the effectiveness. We actually have Whistleblower Protection Act that came in 1989 that protects whistleblowers from punishment or retaliation by their colleagues or their superiors when they are acting in the best interest of the people. We also have the Freedom of Information Act that allows citizens and journalists to request documentation from any federal agency when they suspect wrongdoing, corruption, any of those things. And over the years, whistleblowers and Freedom of Information Act people in the media, individuals, watchdog groups, whatever, have uncovered that the EPA knew paper mills were discharging toxic waste into rivers, uncovered wasteful government spending during hurricane recovery efforts. And this is my favorite, that a major cheese manufacturer was substituting wood, for Parmesan cheese in its product. I do not want to eat wood pulp, so I'm glad they uncovered that one. Usually, or oftentimes, Freedom of Information Act and whistleblowers often spark congressional investigations because the media is now watching. So the people in Congress start to act, and then changes within the bureaucracy or within the law. So, question, here we are. Is the bureaucracy the most powerful arm of government? Have we made that case? I can't answer that. But it's something for you guys to think about. Let's review for a minute. Congress makes the laws, the president executes the laws, the courts interpret the laws, but the bureaucracy does all three. Right? It writes the rules, it enforces the rules, and it sits in judgment of rule breakers. And it is directly involved in the daily lives in ways Congress, presidents, courts are not. By these measures, the bureaucracy can be argued to be the most powerful arm of government, a fourth branch that rivals the other three. In addition, the bureaucracy is massive, much bigger than the presidency, the courts, the Congress. It's permanent. The other three, even the Supreme Court, which has appointments for life, turns over probably at a faster rate than the bureaucracy does. So it's permanent. And it has more expertise than the other three branches. It has all of these policy experts that it employs. And it is less accountable to voters than at least two of the three branches, the Congress and the president. It's 10 million strong. It dwarfs the other branches. What all this says to me is power. The bureaucracy is powerful. So love it or hate it, we need the bureaucracy. Could members of Congress manage the Social Security Administration? No. Could the president run the air traffic control system for a day, a month, forever? No. Without the bureaucracy, the United States would be ungovernable and we'd be sunk, pure and simple. So in the end, we need the bureaucracy, but we need it to be efficient, effective, and responsive to the public. And in a democratic form of government like we have, the responsibility for ensuring that we have an efficient and effective bureaucracy falls on us, you and me. Questions? Comments? Okay, if you've reached the end of this video, you're probably wondering, how do I get my participation points this week? Well, you watched the video, right? You watched it from the beginning to the middle to the end. Well, now leave a question or a comment in the YouTube section, and you'll get your 8 points. And this Wednesday, be sure to watch the video How to Do Research with AI by Parker Bove. You can find this video in Canvas and Google Docs, also on my YouTube channel. I'll have a section in announcements under Parker Bove video. You can post a question or comment there, or you can do it also in the YouTube video. Aloha, and I'll see you next week. Thanks for watching.